I pledge the word of Great Britain that should the United States become involved in a war with Japan, a British declaration would follow within the hour.
After learning of the Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor, British Prime Minister Winston Churchill rushed to fulfill his promise to declare war. But his promise was quickly superseded by news that 25,000 Japanese had landed north of Hong Kong. His stretched colonial forces were now engaged in the Pacific Theater. Curiously, between learning of Pearl Harbor and the attack on Hong Kong, in this culminative moment, after years of courting the USA towards engagement in World War II, Churchill decided to telegraph none other than the Irish Prime Minister Éamon de Valera. Now or never, Churchill wrote. A nation once again. Churchill was making an offer to the de facto independent and neutral Irish state. Join the war effort against the Axis powers. We'll make divided Ireland whole. The message contained something potentially compelling for de Valera. He had opposed the 1921 Anglo-Irish Treaty, which allowed for the North to remain aligned to Great Britain while the rest formed an independent state. But the price of potentially reuniting Ireland? The use of Irish ports for the war effort. And de Valera's answer was... no answer. He never wrote Churchill back. Ireland had been neutral. It remained neutral. Despite this, it's estimated around 43,000 Irish citizens served with the British military during World War II. But as far as any government was concerned, no conscription and no participation in things like the Royal Observer Corps, tasked with spotting German air raids over the night sky. Such was the fragility of the relationship between Westminster, Belfast, and Dublin. Over a decade after the end of the war, as the threat of Nazi invasion of the British Isles converted to a fear of Soviet nuclear strike at the height of the Cold War, things were different, at least for Northern Ireland. The United Kingdom's Royal Observer Corps had changed its mission from German plane detection to nuclear strike detection. They had instruments not only to identify a nuclear strike, but to estimate its fallout and strength. The ROC had 31 so-called operation rooms spread across the UK, prepared to alert the nation within minutes should a nuclear strike occur. And ROC Group 31 of 31 was located under Thiepval Barracks in the town of Lisburn, Northern Ireland. Today, if you visit the barracks in Lisburn, you'll find a plaque commemorating that time. It reads, "To monitor the nuclear threat during the Cold War. Forewarned is forearmed." Leaving Lisburn in Northern Ireland on the A3, heading towards Carrick-on-Shannon in the Republic of Ireland, you'll encounter a peculiarity. About a third of the way, you'll cross the border between Northern Ireland, part of the United Kingdom, and the Republic of Ireland. So far, so good. But not long after you cross the border, you'll cross again, back in Northern Ireland and the UK. 2 miles later, another international border, back in Republic of Ireland. 2 miles later, again, Northern Ireland. Once more for good measure, and you're finally in Republic of Ireland for good. In all, you've crossed an international border 5 times, 4 of which happened in the space of 6 miles. That's no problem today, as both Northern Ireland, as part of the UK, and the Republic of Ireland are in the European Union, and all 28 member states enjoy freedom of movement within, which means no border checks. If you actually drove the route, you probably wouldn't even notice the international crossings, as the only real difference is the occasional sign indicating the speed limit changing from miles per hour in Northern Ireland to kilometers per hour in the Republic of Ireland. But that simplicity is threatened as the UK transitions out of the European Union. The stability of Ireland depends on how the UK and EU negotiate a future trading relationship. So let's go deeper with this topic. When the UK voted to leave the European Union in June of 2016, for better or worse, they also signed on to a whole lot of complication. Divorce bill, EU migration, common fisheries policy, financial services, the overall trading relationship, but perhaps none with larger historical complication as that of Northern Ireland and the Republic of Ireland. Northern Ireland has been officially partitioned from the rest of the island since a series of acts and treaties made it so in the early 1920s. 1968 to 1998 were 30 years of intense violence in the north, mainly between those who wanted to be a part of the UK and those who wanted a united Ireland. Through the Good Friday Agreement of 1998, Northern Ireland's status as a country within the United Kingdom was mostly settled.
The two prime ministers emerged just before 6 this evening to inaugurate the historic agreement they hope will usher in a new era for the island.
The Republic of Ireland amended its constitution to take out any right to reclaim the North. And for 20 years that agreement is held, in part because the movement of people, goods and services are seamless over the border. As part of the EU Single Market and Customs Union, any Irish national can go to Northern Ireland, and any teddy bear assembled in Northern Ireland can be imported and sold in the Republic of Ireland. But if the UK leaves the Single Market and Customs Union, UK product regulations might shift. Different regulatory standards means the need for border checks. Products might also be subject to custom duties or tariffs, meaning a need for border checks. The freedom of movement of people might also end, meaning a need for border checks. In short, leaving the EU creates a significant challenge for Northern Ireland, which, unlike the mainland, shares a land border with an EU nation. Here's the implication. After Brexit, the open border might be repartitioned with barriers and checks. Back to the day when traveling between Northern Ireland and the Republic of Ireland meant disruptions, smugglers, and violence. And though Ireland seemed to take a back seat to other issues during the referendum campaign, it's not as though politicians didn't realize this might be a problem. Phase 1 of the negotiations last year included a dialogue on the Ireland-Northern Ireland border led by the chief negotiators themselves. In her Mansion House speech earlier this year, Theresa May made two things clear. One, that the UK is leaving the single market.
We're leaving the single market. Life is going to be different. In certain ways, our access to each other's markets will be less than it is now.
And two, just a few sentences prior,
as Prime Minister of the whole United Kingdom, I am not going to let our departure from the European Union do anything to set back the historic progress that we have made in Northern Ireland. We also want as frictionless a border as possible between us and the EU, so that we don't damage the integrated supply chains our industries depend on, and don't have a hard border between Northern Ireland and Ireland.
This begs the question, how? How could borders be enforced, tariffs applied, immigration papers checked, all without a hard border? Labour opposition leader Jeremy Corbyn has suggested a permanent customs union after Brexit to avoid a hard border in Ireland.
No one should be willing to sacrifice the Good Friday Agreement. So Labour would seek to negotiate a new, comprehensive UK-EU customs union to ensure there are no tariffs with Europe and to help avoid any need whatsoever for a hard border in Northern Ireland.
And in February of 2018, the EU released a draft withdrawal agreement, offering a backup plan that if nothing else was agreed, Northern Ireland would remain a part of the EU customs union, separate from the rest of the UK. But Prime Minister Theresa May has rejected both these options. The permanent customs union on grounds that it doesn't realign the UK away from the EU sufficiently, the second being that if Northern Ireland stays in the single market and customs union, it's effectively cut off from the rest of the United Kingdom. And unfortunately, an EU-UK Brexit transition agreement in March failed to find an agreeable solution to this problem. The UK is kinda stuck. On the one hand, they could stay aligned with Europe, keep the open border, but then lose the exit part of Brexit. On the other hand, they could realign away from Europe, but potentially cut off Northern Ireland in the process. Foreign Secretary Boris Johnson acknowledged as much in a leaked letter to the Prime Minister. Reading from the article, he tried to play down the exaggerated impression of how important checks are at EU external borders, while also admitting that the border issue was one of the most important challenges to the whole process. Third-way solutions have been offered, but not substantiated. Some have offered that countries like Switzerland enjoy free trade arrangements with the EU, but the Swiss accept free movement of people, unacceptable to most Brexiteers. Even an arrangement like that between Canada and the EU would require border checks to ensure that third-party country goods weren't given preferential treatment. Brexit Secretary and Chief Negotiator David Davis asserted that technology might be able to solve the issues through a so-called smart border, but critics argue that technology simply can't achieve a perfectly frictionless Irish border. Adding to the practical complications is a political one. Theresa May gambled on a general election in 2017 and actually lost her governing majority in Parliament. 9 seats short, she was forced to form a minority government with the help of none other than 10 members of the Northern Irish Democratic Unionist Party, supportive of Brexit but opposed to a Brexit arrangement with a hard Irish border, and opposed to a Brexit arrangement with Northern Ireland partitioned off from the rest of the UK. In fact, they saw the backstop option to maintain regulatory alignment on the island as an assault on UK sovereignty. On any close Brexit vote in Parliament, it is exactly these 10 members on which a majority will hinge. The Irish border of today, running through homes, businesses, roadways, ocean boundaries is the most complicated Brexit negotiators face. It is a place where the bureaucratic machinations of a future trade arrangement meet the realities of an imperfect peace agreement. The centuries-long, complicated relationship between the governments of Ireland and Westminster is fragile once more. I'm actually recording this just as I finished the video. I noticed that we hit 100 patrons on Patreon. That is an amazing achievement. You guys keep the channel afloat. You guys make this thing worthwhile. I can carve out my time because of your generosity. If you haven't already, go check out my Patreon, patreon.com/theexploration. Later, guys.